Okay, um, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on building blocks for your telework program. I am Elham Shirazi. I am the consultant that works with King County Metro on a program called Work Smart. And Work Smart provides free resources and one-on-one assistance to employers for the purposes of developing and expanding your telework programs. We also help with policy development and helping employers navigate post-pandemic into hopefully what will be some level of teleworking and perhaps some hybrid level, or for some it might be fully remote. A few housekeeping issues. Everybody will be muted, and please do enter your questions in the chat box, and we will open up at the end for Q&A. This webinar will be recorded and will be shared with everybody who registered. So you will get a recording, also showing the PowerPoint. We will also post the webinar on our website, which is kingcounty.gov/WorkSmart. And in fact, on our website, we have a lot of good tools that you will find helpful for program development. After you've completed this webinar, we will be sending out an evaluation at the end, and it would be great to hear back from you. We also will send an email to everybody who registered, asking if they would like to meet with us one-on-one to discuss your needs and help tailor them to your organization. So today, actually, before we start, we wanted to do some polls to find out, who you are representing. So Cindy, go ahead. So please check. Actually, you probably won't be allowed to do multiple choice here. Okay, we're trying to see. Wow, everybody's from public sector today? Okay, that'll be interesting. So we can put a little bit more of a public sector slant to it. So that's good to know. Okay, Cindy, can you please bring up the second poll? We want to go to question 2. Yes, thank you. Do you currently know what are your employer's plans for return to work post-pandemic? And you are allowed multiple choices on this because you might be having a lot of options. By the way, for those of you, who are not familiar with hoteling, it's where you have drop-in stations and people aren't assigned a full-time dedicated desk. So it looks like you will some of you are undecided, and it keeps changing. So let's share the results. So basically, from what I'm seeing in this data, it really changed. So a lot of your organizations seem to be undecided, which is interesting. I mean, there's only about 7 of you here today. So, but some of your organizations will offer hoteling. It looks like some will have fully remote, some will have part-time remote. And so a lot of those options are open. But I think the most interesting part of this is that the majority of your employers have not decided. And in fact, that's probably where a lot of employers in the country are sitting, in that, they are, kind of waiting for everything, the vaccinations to get underway and for schools to open to see if we will have some level of normalcy, maybe in the fall or sooner. What happened under COVID, and if you've ever heard me say this before, I do want to repeat it, is that the type of teleworking that we're seeing under COVID or pandemic related teleworking is very difficult, in that it poses challenges, because typically teleworking was about, when an employee's home to get so they're not distracted, they can focus, and schools would be open, childcare centers would be open and in existence. And it would just offer a good day for focusing, or for some people, a way of working. And but under the pandemic, as we all know, this has been very different, and people are challenged by a lot of the other duties that have been shipped to home, and people can't go out. So it's a little bit of a tough situation for a lot of employees. Okay. So I want to get into some level of data just to share with you. This is based on PwC data that was collected in January, and based on this data, executives seem to be more ready to ramp up the return to the office, and in fact, they were saying that by July they thought that 75% of the executives anticipated at least half of the office would be back, in terms of the workforce being there. And this expectation is a little bit lower on behalf of people who are office workers, whereby 61% of the office workers expect to their offices being occupied at least 50%. And as we know, and I mentioned this just now, returning to the workplace will not be easy because it's complicated by the rollout of vaccines and the age groups and the confidence in returning to the hybrid office. But there are, uncertainties even on behalf of employers still about how to bring employees back safely and how to align the scheduling of the workforce with schools reopening, or even if it's possible to resume business travel. Let me move on. What happened under the pandemic is that a lot of organizations just reacted to the pandemic and sent people home. Typically, what an implementation process for telework would look like would be, some of the following steps, where you would first gain management commitment. You would have someone in control, of this telework project. There would be a steering committee with members from IT and HR and facilities and some of the departments that are participating. And the goal of the steering committee would be to develop policies and agreement, and weigh in on how employees would be selected, what are the eligibility criteria for the program, as well as determining the IT side of it in a very secure fashion. And a very important step, also look at costs and savings, but train the participants and the managers as to how their world would change if they would be teleworking, and of course doing some evaluation and troubleshooting. Under the pandemic, obviously you had to have executive support to allow people to work at home, and there was eligibility determined for the pandemic, which in the case of a lot of white-collar jobs meant everybody, and it wasn't based on any criteria such as meeting past performance needs or meeting productivity or hitting above, and whether or not somebody had the kind of independent characteristics that would lend itself to teleworking. So the eligibility kind of went out the door. If you had a job and you weren't essential, most employees, and something close to, I think, 50% of the employee population in this country started teleworking. At first it was 40%, but it very quickly grew. And IT had to make some fast decisions, about connectivity, whether it was still VPN or cloud-based, or again, some of you in Seattle are very advanced, of course, from an IT perspective compared to the rest of the country. And basically, at best, if a company had time, maybe they would do some outreach to find out what issues there were, challenges there were. But in a lot of companies, I'm finding that none of this was done. Some employers sent some guidelines and tips. By the way, our website has some of these, and there was follow-up. So a very, I would say, systemic type of an operation was kind of crunched into 1 week, and a process that would normally take, at least a month to develop, probably just happened overnight. And typically, for upper management to consider teleworking, there have to be some return on investment. And obviously, one of the most important questions is, will people be productive? I think what we've seen through the pandemic over and over again, and we talked about some of these data points in our previous webinar. If you haven't seen it, please, do go to our website because it's there. But it seems that people are as productive or more productive under, the pandemic, given all the challenges that are present. And so we're hoping that we've come to a place where productivity will not be an issue as much. However, there are still people who think that maybe you have to be, as they call it, butts and seats to get the productivity. I apologize for using that term, but it's become a very common term. And obviously, the cost would be a factor. Would there be any cost savings, or would there be some costs for equipping people? Coverage, again, it can be improved because you are able to spread people's schedules in the sense that some groups can start earlier and some groups can start later, so you have a longer coverage period. Obviously, the impacts on overhead, which we are starting to see a lot of signs for, which have made employers reassess, do we need so much, office space? If some of our, workforce is just coming into the office maybe, once every few weeks, or some groups are going to be fully remote. So a lot of employers are, seeing some of those reasons for, maybe for saving money, as well as saving utilities and some other costs. And, what has really become important is that for retaining employees, I think we've shown really good retention levels during the pandemic. And part of it is because people are scared to walk away from their jobs, although there is some mobility because they may not find another job. But recruitment is, as much as teleworking is a big element in recruitment, a lot of employees want flexibility. In fact, I think after the pandemic, most employees who are going to look for a job will want to see some level of flexibility. And then sustainability is important. And a lot of employees also look for an employer that does, look at how they're saving the environment and how they're operating more sustainably in this environment. Now, I'm sorry, before I move on to the next slide, let's do another poll to get an understanding of how advanced your telework programs are. So which of the following does your employer have in place? Do they have a formal policy, an agreement, multiple choices again? Training, as you can see, for teleworkers and managers, stipends, provision of technology, and no formal program. Okay. I'm waiting for all the votes to come in. And okay, it seems that, wow, a good group of you have a formal policy. Now, I'm not sure if that is an intermittent policy or one which will be considered post-pandemic, and the same amount have agreements. Some have training for teleworkers, some have it for managers. And actually, that's an area in which we can really help you through WorkSmart, because we have those presentations, and we can do it for your work site, as well as do recordings for you if you want, so that employees can listen to them and managers can listen to them at their own time. Only one of you is offering a stipend, and but we are seeing stipends appear in this environment. And in California, our labor code actually has some stipulations that almost make it mandatory for employers to provide some level of equipment and a reimbursement if people are using their own. I'm not sure about the labor laws in Washington, but it would be good to look at them and see, if there is a stipulation there. Excuse me. Very sorry. And I can see that some of you have provided technology or equipment, and a few of you don't even have a program. So again, please do feel welcome to get in contact with us, and my contact information is at the end of the presentation so that we can work with you in developing some of these resources. Okay, let's move on. And always takes a second for the slides to go. Yes. So are contracts, policies, or guidelines necessary? I think a lot of you have them, but it's good to know why. One of the main reasons is for, safety, so that everyone's on the same page, the rules are clear. It's clear that employees should maintain a safe office space at home, a designated office space. And you also want to make sure from a technology perspective that you're doing the right things. Having a policy allows more people to be part of the program because the rules of engagement are clear and it's no longer about the one or the two. And there are legalities around working from home that I will be going over on the next slide. So it's good to have them as part of your documents. And it allows for transparency. So, the rules for eligibility, the rules for participation are all clear. Some of you may have, as I said, those intermittent policies that may not have eligibility criteria. But, often policies are very clear about, what some of those criteria are, and that the job has to be right, the employee has to be right, the technology has to work, and the manager has to approve of this arrangement. In these policies, typically the degree of flexibility, is clarified, meaning how often can people telework, what flexibility has shown us in this environment is that there are 3 areas for flexibility. One is in the location of work, which means, is it home? Is it the office? Is it a co-working office? Is it a drop-in station? As well as how often, people can use these locations for doing their work. There's also flexibility around the geography for employees. Does it have to be in state? Does it have to be in a certain city? Or can it even be done completely remotely? As well as what are the hours of flexibility? In fact, many people do believe that the hours for flexibility will be probably coming a little bit later, where people get a lot more flexibility in when they can start and end work, which will be great for some people. And one of the benefits of having a policy or a guideline is that it will continue after COVID. I know a lot of you are from public sector today, so obviously you probably have some level of policy development. Now, in terms of legalities, first and foremost are your Federal Labor Standards Act as they relate to wage and hour laws. So, that you're cognizant that if you have non-exempt employees who are teleworking, again, the timekeeping for them, there's some way of keeping records in terms of when they started, when they ended, and to make sure that it does not go in excess of 40 hours a week, and overtime is not taken without prior permission. So it's okay to, to have overtime, but you want to make sure that, employees just don't go into overtime. Workers' comp is an area that I think we're going to learn a lot about this, post-pandemic, and that is that when an employee works at home, the home becomes an extension of the office. So workers' comp does apply to the home. So the way that a lot of employers safeguard themselves is that they do ask the employee to have a designated workspace. So, if they're injured in that workspace, that would be considered probably, something that would be part of workers' comp. If they go to the kitchen and cut their hand, obviously that would not be workers' comp. But, there'll be some slippery slopes. This has not been a legality that has stopped us from teleworking, because in the past, there haven't been a lot of cases that have been, have shown an employee trying to take an advantage of their employer. In fact, most organizations we always tell them, call your workers' comp carrier, ask them if my staff teleworks, does that change my rates? The answer up to now has been no, unless you start to get a lot of cases. Now, OSHA does not require you to conduct a home safety assessment. However, do keep in mind that it's always good to give your employees safe guidelines for how to set up their home office so that they can't hurt themselves. And on our website, and you can also, talk to us, we have some of those ergonomic guidelines, and we also have checklists that your employees can use to determine, for themselves if that place is safe. Most employers in their agreements and policies prior to COVID did give themselves an out, meaning that if required with advance notice, they could go to an employee's home just to inspect the office portion for safety. But a lot of people were not doing it. A lot of employers, I would say probably a good 92% never even did home office inspections. The ADA, American Disabilities Act, and FMLA do not require telework to be an accommodation. However, if your HR department decides that it's part of it, then that could be, that could be part and parcel. We also want to, recommend and make sure that your languages and your policies are not discriminatory in any fashion. Even today, I was reading a public sector, policy for a city, and they had called teleworking a privilege and not a right. And I had to correct them and say, don't use terms like privilege, benefit, perk, because those are, create haves and have-nots. And in fact, it's best to call telework a workplace strategy. Have any of these been a showstopper? No. In fact, the federal government has had a telework program for about, over 30 years. And I always say, well, if the feds have been doing it successfully, then everybody else can. And so these legalities have not caused reasons not to implement teleworking. So what's typically involved in a policy? Now, again, I know, please do put your questions in the chat box, or hopefully at the end of this webinar, we can just open mics and we can talk about all this. But obviously, the guidelines or the policies, some organizations like guidelines because they're smaller. Might be one of you who had signed up, which is a small nonprofit. They don't like to have policies. They call them guidelines because their HR manual is a lot smaller than what you see in a public entity. However, what's included are, the workers' comp issues, the liability. For example, an employer is not liable for injuries to third parties. What are the resources that can be used, for teleworking? Is there IT support? Are there hours during which IT support's available for people who are working from home? If equipment's not functioning, what do they do? Well, obviously, in many cases, you'd have to bring your equipment in for someone to look at it, but as much as possible would be done online. Insurance of equipment, if the employer provides it, the employer is responsible for insurance and for the upkeep. And if the employee provides it, typically that's the employee's responsibility. There's guidelines around having a designated workspace and making sure that there's no impact on the non-teleworkers. The goals of the program should be clear. Why are we offering flexibility? Is it for improved work life? Is it to save space? Is it multiple reasons? Is it to make sure that you can recruit and retain easily? There's a discussion of selection criteria, which we will go into a little bit later, as to what those could be for a job or for an employee. What are the arrangements that are available? In one case, I was working with a very big public entity in the state of Georgia recently, and they had some different categories, such as fully remote, part-time remote, occasional remote, and they finally decided, you know what, it's all open. So any level of teleworking would be acceptable as long as the selection criteria were being met and the jobs were correct. And some employers, the other day I was looking at another policy, have actually limited it and said Mondays and Fridays are teleworking days and Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Wednesdays are in-office days. And I raised the issue with them that was kind of limiting. And also, on a Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, and Thursday, their parking lot would be filled if people are still driving, and the office would be, overcrowded. So it's good to try and spread it out, in my opinion. But it all depends on, how within your department or your organization, management is keen on doing it. A lot of times, there are policies on a company level, but individual departments get to tweak it. And obviously, communication needs such as accessibility, availability, all of that have to be clear. And people, have to make sure that everything's on their Outlook calendar or whatever, kind of a calendar you use to show available and non-available time. Now, a lot of you said that you have an agreement. I hope that some of these, not all of this, but some of these elements should be in your agreement. Obviously, a location. If you're working from home, what's that address? Some employers allow people to work like if they have two homes, because this question comes up all the time. I have a vacation cabin, and I have, I'm usually at my home. Can I, be out of town at my cabin and still be teleworking? If that's something that you're okay with, that location should also be mentioned. But it gets a little blurry as to what's vacation time and what is work time. And then there should be some agreement about how many days are available from when to when. If after the pandemic, there's going to be different decisions, then, some of those dates should be clear so people don't expect it to just carry on. Because as we see, a lot of employers are still unsure as to what this will look like. And, what is the bandwidth of the time that you're available? When is the start time, when's an end time? So you have some expectations. And then what's the equipment? What are the assignments? And there might be some more clarifications about communications and how soon emails should be sent out, if they should be sent out. And I think we all wake up to emails that are just full. I know I start my day with 70 emails. I work on both coasts and also middle of the country. And throughout the day, I think I get another 70. So I know we're all navigating in a time when everybody wants an answer and everybody thinks it should be right away. But we do have to curtail some of these, some of these expectations, especially as we, try to settle in more of a normal environment, because, maintaining this constant gratification level will become difficult. And people are having a hard time focusing when there's constantly demand on their time and they can't focus on projects. Okay. Now, as far as employee characteristics, it used to be that, employees who were independent, who were self-starters, who were flexible, who knew their jobs, who had the right skill level, who were organized, would be, probably some of the employees which would be considered for teleworking. Um, and again, under the pandemic, some of this has gone away. But I think that if we're basing an organization on having more remote workers, then these are the types of characteristics we want to nurture in our employees, but also recruit, employees who probably show some level, of independence, even in the recruitment. So it does change expectations in terms of how, an employee can work in a remote environment, and what are some skills. For some introverts, it's very difficult to be a remote worker. And in fact, the other day I came across an article which basically was called Teleworking for Introverts. So there is a whole group of, I would say, a whole art developing around that as well, because as extroverts, some of us do well. I think you can tell I'm an extrovert. I always reach out to people for team building. If I don't know new team members that I work with in different geographies, I try to schedule time after a few times that we work together to get to know them, even on a personal level. But, some people are shy of doing that. So these are some thoughts, about going, forward. And, some people do want to see a ranking of these characteristics. So if you wanted to do an assessment, you could even ask the employee to rank themselves, on some of these characteristics. And again, as you can see, if you don't have, a high level of organization or communication, it probably is hard to be, full-time a teleworker. But, maybe a day or two a week, a hybrid model might work for you. And a lot of times, what employers and employees are finding is that it's good to have some weekly understanding of what tasks and deliverables are being completed. This is not something that every organization does, but the more remote people are, the easier it is for the manager and employee to agree on these tasks on a weekly basis. And maybe just, again, send in a line on what was completed. These forms should not be difficult. They should not be lengthy, and they should not take too much time to complete. So this is a very high level type of form. And as far as training, I know I brought up, the importance of training. Then I know that some of you may have had some teleworker training, but a lot of you have not had manager training. But again, going post-pandemic, and as we're navigating towards that space, it's really important to bring these programs back to some structure, and make sure the employees understand the program, the policies, the process. They know the program parameters. We share with them tips about getting organized and how they schedule their days. Obviously, part of this training is the ergonomic setup, and also for them to know some employers have a way to assess your ergonomics without ever coming into your home. And this might be an area, if you don't currently have it, that your employer explores moving forward. And also creating boundaries between family and others. Hopefully, when schools open, childcare centers come back, so that people understand, or even your significant others, your roommates, if I'm at home, I'm working. This is not the time to interrupt me. I know all those rules have gone out the door with the pandemic, but it's really good to bring some of them back as we move forward, because it's going to make for a lot less fatiguing day, where people are doing everything at one time, and it's just hard to create those boundaries. Obviously, safety is a part of this. So they would get some training on, again, how to be safe. What are the things that they should consider? Having a fire extinguisher near their home, knowing their exits, near their designated workspace, knowing where the exits are in case of an emergency. The technology still is important, although I think a lot of people have, really advanced in their technological skills overnight, or over the last 12 months. And, you do want to also do some problem resolution about challenges and how they can be overcome when people are teleworking. Now, the manager training deals with some of the same issues, but it really accentuates the need for managing by objectives, setting deliverables, and the role of managers in a fully remote environment has changed. In that, managers have had to undertake a lot of other issues, and if they're not, it's important that they start thinking about them. And some of those are regarding mental health, detecting fatigue, and making sure the employees have resources for taking, getting some time to collaborate, also some non-work time to be with other employees. In fact, if part of your workforce is going to be remote and part of it will be hybrid, again, you want to make sure that you have these, set up times for group meetings, for huddles, and for, also for exchange and serendipity. A lot of people like the serendipity of the office, the water cooler chats, the brainstorming. So we've got to be cognizant of that and kind of, bring those back however possible. And but what we do want to also ensure is that managers know they have control. If they think a job or an employee is probably not ready for teleworking, then they should have the right to say maybe this job, is not something that can be done remotely, and or maybe this employee has to make these changes to their performance, before they're allowed to be remote. Managers also get to assess jobs and individuals, and it's good to give them those tools, and making sure that they also remember that teleworking is a management prerogative. This is not an employee right. It's not available for all jobs, but we have to understand, okay, so what is the language we use to make employees comfortable with what part of their job is portable or can be done somewhere else. We also talk a lot about communication needs and how that looks, especially in this virtual environment, and even going into the future, and avenues for collaboration. I'm going to touch upon some of these tips in a few more slides. Okay, so overall, please do remember that your organization is going to be transitioning from managing by presence to managing by goals and objectives. And these are always very important to the telework program. And basically, the deliverables have to be clear. The training that the employee gets should be clear about how employees can develop their own milestones and their deadlines. The more you can get employees to think about what their role is on a weekly basis as a manager, they can tell you, here's what I'm going to do, here's the deadline, and manage their own work. I think the more powerful the organization can become. However, what we found in the pandemic is that actually, and I've heard this from many managers, is that I wasn't organized before, but I had to become really organized during the pandemic so that I could, I knew how to, tell my employees what my expectations were. I think we have another poll now, and that is about how do you currently measure productivity? So again, you have multiple choices here. If it, in your organization, how do you measure productivity, whether it's remote or it's, for people in the office? Okay. So this is very interesting that, a lot of you do base it on communications. And in fact, I'm going to show you some data in a second. Oh, I'll let you. Great. Oh, we still have all 7 with us, so I'm happy to see that. Um, so yes, communications is a big indicator. I see that managing by objectives and honor system line up. Metrics, some jobs have metrics, some jobs don't. Obviously, if you work in a call center, the metrics are clear. If you have a job that is objective and deliverable driven, you won't have, numbers and percentages, but it will come back to quality quantity. And, I'm encouraged to see that few of you have this, work monitoring program online. Some organizations see a need for it, but I think a lot of organizations have stepped away. Again, it's going to be based on what kind of jobs you have at the organization. So let's go, and now I want to take you to the next slide. Sorry. Okay. I like using this data from Society for Human Resources Management because this was collected in 2014, so it's really pre-pandemic. But what this clearly shows that even pre-pandemic, just like most of you chimed in, a lot of managers said that they were looking at responsiveness as a way to know productivity. So, getting results, getting that report, getting emails, but it can't all be about emails, as I mentioned before, are all very important in making sure that, employees are participating and they're collaborating, and it's a great way to measure productivity. As you can see, again, we do see setting goals and parameters or managing by objectives come up here. And very close to what you all told us today, the honor system seems to be another way, that we have to trust each other, we trust our employees, and that they're the same methods in and out of the office. And I want you to see that very low on this chart is organization monitors employees via software. And although some more employers are thinking about this, but we all know that just seeing when somebody logged on, when somebody logged off doesn't show productivity. Although it's important for your employees who are non-exempt, but they're not necessarily indicative of what happened between those hours. And so yeah, these are very close to your answers. Okay. So every employee is different. And, obviously these building blocks are going to be part of what you do in the future as well. But, your managers have to be able to practice all of these types of management and know that every employee is different and different jobs need, a different style of management, and different aspects of a job may need a different style. So sometimes we have to be very, here's what you have to do, here's how I'm going to know it's done, and here's the steps that you take to get your work completed. Coaching means that, the employees learn their job, they know their skills, they're at the right skill level, but you're still coaching over the shoulder, with them, and they need a little bit more information about what is the job at hand. Advising is the level where the employees are getting better and better, and they, are learning what they have to do. They're learning about your expectations. They know exactly what it takes. And so you're just advising them, and maybe when they they send in their goals for the week or what they're going to work on, you're just looking at it and going, yeah, or maybe, move this to here. You're still giving some level of advice. Delegation is the easiest. If you have a remote worker, which is someone who knows their job, who has the right skill level, you basically say 2 words and the employee knows exactly what to do, or there's a list of projects and the employee knows exactly what to do this. But as I mentioned, sometimes with different projects, we have to direct a little bit, and go back to delegation. Now, something else I do want to add is that for some organizations, mentoring has become an issue when everybody is remote. And of course, that's been the pandemic with, with some of your employees, but do consider, mentoring in the future. Sometimes a new employee, sometimes, if this is somebody's first job, or, they're just learning about, some skills. It's good to, make sure that you have them on site a little bit more so that there is, the ability for them to learn from others. Or if, you have senior employees who are not there, meaning senior, meaning that they've been at the job for a while, and you have junior employees, if they're not there at the same time, that there is a way to do that transference of knowledge. Because mentoring cannot happen always virtually, and it may need some interpersonal exchange. I want you to also know that, hopefully next year, in a year from now, that a lot of issues have been resolved as far as the pandemic. Let's cross our fingers, and I've heard that you all in the state of Washington are doing a great job of vaccination compared to some of us in other states. I'm based in California, as I've mentioned before, but that, schools have come back, childcare centers, universities. So, but we don't know. Now, as far as helping your employees, I'm sorry, there's an error here and I should have fixed it. On a weekly basis, I think you want to assist the managers, want to assist the employees with goal setting and, define the objectives and deliverables, talk about, time frames. So, on a weekly basis, either the employee takes the initiative to develop what's that list, what are the time frames, and what they think your expectations are, or the manager does this. By the end of the week, hopefully you've had a meeting, a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting with your team, or it could be in both places. So it might be that you have a meeting and some people are virtual and some are are actually in the office. And so that by the end of the week, you've had a team meeting and you've also had the time to at least give some feedback on an individual basis to the employee as a manager so that they can develop their next week of work. This kind of management these days has become very normal. It's no longer, we wait a whole year to tell people how they're doing, but we do it on a weekly basis. And you really have to be cognizant that there have to be, some time scheduled so that you can help people. I was talking to another organization the other day, and they were also a public organization, and they said it was an all managers meeting, and for the first time in years, everybody participated because they could participate remotely and in person. And this was in another state where they're bringing employees back to the office. And so some other things to think about: teamwork is very important. Oh, I better get through this fast. Teamwork is very important. And, as managers need to chime in as to when employees should attend, by phone or virtually or in person as we get into the future. Those 15-minute team huddles are really effective in getting, smaller departments going where everybody just stands up and, gives a quick, this is what I'm going to do today. It gets people excited about their day. Obviously, we're seeing issues with isolation and, it's really important to have employee engagements, and we'll talk about that very soon. And we want to make sure that employees are trained, and we know that we are. I've mentioned huddles, virtual coffee breaks are good. Sometimes virtual lunches to have some interaction. You also want to make sure that managers can place employees at ease so they can talk to them about their issues that are coming up. I did talk about brainstorming, and again, as we navigate post-pandemic, it's it's important maybe to create that virtual and physical presence together sometimes for brainstorming. And I think we've all learned that FaceTime does help build relationships, but too much of a good thing is also too much. A lot of us navigate from meeting to meeting on Zoom and Teams and WebEx, and it gets to be a very tiring day. So I think it's important for the organization to send messages, or whether it's the manager, to improve morale and keep optimism, especially right now that people are very tired. And make sure that employees have work-life balance. I think I've talked enough about accessibility, and keep making sure that your calendars are updated for everybody, so everyone can look at each other's calendars and know when's personal non-available time and what's good, available time. I can tell you this chart basically was done in 2018, and it was showing, how quickly we would navigate in the next 3 to 5 years, towards more online platforms and social media. And it's amazing that, we're probably right now, we're where we would have been 5 years from now, in terms of the adoption of virtual collaboration. And health and wellness are very important. I know that a lot of you are cognizant of these, but keep a regular schedule, start the same time, end the same time. Stay connected, make sure you're getting outdoors. The weather's getting better. You have to get fresh air. You have to keep your immune system strong. And, you want to make sure that your organization offers avenues for some of this. So what can managers do to support? I think empathy is going to be part of the picture going on post-pandemic, during this still, and recognizing the impact of fatigue, isolation, loneliness, especially for millennials who feel very isolated, and for people who live alone. And you really want to make sure that your organization is thinking about employee assistance programs and mental health, because that will be part of the picture as well. So I talked about employee engagements. I hope you're doing some of this stuff, but if you're not, think about it. Please make it part of your, part of your program, so employees have a time to get together for business reasons and for non-business reasons, because some of your culture is getting lost by not having these type of meetings. And you want to make sure that the culture stays alive. So I'm just gonna, I've told you about a lot of the next thoughtful steps: developing a post-pandemic policy, the return to workplace guidelines, whatever that is. The future looks hybrid in location, hours, and geography. Think about a stipends program. Do think about a reimbursement program, because if you expect people to telework more, we really do need to have a little bit more available to them. And not all employees will want to be remote all the time, but what I'm picking up from the data, that only something like under 8% of the employees want to have a place to come into work. And it seems that a lot of people have sold themselves on this idea. Consider hoteling if it makes sense, having those drop-in stations so that you can save, and thinking about sustainability. I'm going to actually skip over these last slides in the interest of time, but 82% of company leaders are intending to keep remote working at least some of the time. 47% are thinking about it full time, and 36% are saying they're willing to hire employees who are remote. Just a few things about Work Smart. We're here to help you through every step there is to develop your post-pandemic program, develop your transitional program, go through the challenges with you and the development of resources, identify concerns. I'm doing a lot of focus groups with organizations these days to find what the pockets of challenges are. And from both management perspective and employee, those meetings are separate. We also have a technology consultant if you need it, and we offer training. The trainings are 1 hour. They can be shorter or longer, and we tailor those, and we provide evaluation assistance. So with that, here is the way to get in contact with us. As you can see, my email is there, my phone number is there, and our website is there. So we look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I want to look at the questions in the chat. I don't see any. Cindy, are we able to open mics?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so at this point, we've actually opened your mics. So if you have some questions, you can ask us. And if you have muted yourselves, unmute yourselves if you want to speak.
Hi there. I actually do have a question. Well,
Yes.
first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the content. So our organization, our county, is considering it moving to a permanent telework, but struggling with the data, and now feel that we've got to get commissioner buy-in. Which sends us down a rabbit hole, of course.
Yeah.
And so the latest suggestion is to send out a survey to all of the current employees that are teleworking and ask them what's working well and what's not working well, and try to get like a gauge. Do you have any thoughts on?
Sure. And feel free to talk with me later. We can always schedule time. How large is your organization? How many employees?
1,500.
Okay. It's not a bad idea to do a survey. Of course, you would want it to be close-ended questions, meaning you give them choices. And then, we can help you with some questions that are in other surveys. But also, then once you get the data back, you may want to go back and do some focus groups to dig deeper and get people to talk. So I'd be happy to talk with you offline about this. And I will be sending an email to everybody to, if they want to schedule time so we can go over some of these issues.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else have a question? Okay, well, we've come to the end of our webinar. I'm sorry if I spoke too much. I hope I've answered a lot of your questions or given you some new ideas. You will be getting a recording. Don't forget that we will be sending an evaluation survey, and those surveys are really helpful to us to gauge, how we can improve our services. So thank you, and bye.